1. This is my experience from Jekyll Island Beach Club, a hotel that I now know is quite infamous for being haunted and frequented by ghost hunters. I have lived in Georgia my entire life. We traveled all around the state growing up, going to conferences my mother attended for her job. I was around 9 years old on this particular trip, so it was 2003. It was just me, my mother and father. We still like to share these stories at family gatherings, and I figured y'all would appreciate them. I will preface this by saying I was an extremely independent and resourceful kid. So my parents let me do my thing on these types of trips and make friends with the other kids also in attendance. So don't get your panties in a wad about me being left alone in the hotel room for a couple of hours, or being allowed to run around the resort with my buds. When we arrived at the hotel, our room immediately creeped us out. Upon opening the door, there was a staircase leading up to our suite. It was spacious, with a dining room, king-sized bed, and wall partially separating the bedroom from a living room area, with a pull-out couch. We were just chillin', exhausted from our drive, when we heard the sound of a door creaking open. We looked to our right, and the door to what we assumed was a closet was ajar. It wasn't a closet, it was a brick wall. My family and I are Diet Coke fanatics. I used to pound them even if they were room temperature. Disgusting, I know. After the door incident, I figured maybe I needed a little caffeine, so I'd went to open a DC from a 12-pack we'd bought coming in. Completely flat. Well, that's weird. Try to open another, completely flat. Curious, the next day, we tried to open one from the 12-pack we'd left in the car. It was fine. Something had been draining the energy, in this case carbonation, from all of our belongings. My mom had a sweet BlackBerry at the time. I used to play that little game where you bounce the ball off the little bar that goes back and forth across the screen. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Her BlackBerry had been charging since we got there, and was all the way just up. After the door and an unsuccessful attempt at having a DC, I figured I'd play a little of said game. I unplugged it, plopped down on the couch, and as soon as I opened the damn game, I watched the battery completely drain and die. No electronics we'd brought on the trip would hold a charge. Everything would die as soon as we came into the suite. Sunburned and reminiscing on my day boogie boarding, my rents left me in the suite to hit up the conference's reception. I whipped out my markers and started drawing when I heard the toilet, which was on the other side of the wall, separating my pull-out couch from the master, flush. Alright, that's weird. I decided to lay in my parents' bed and watch the toilet to see what the hell was going on. About 15 minutes later, yes, I was dedicated to my toilet prowl. I watched, wide-eyed, as the handle on the toilet went down and it happened again. My 9-year-old brain was trying to make logical sense of this. I was freaked out, but not frightened. I do believe to this day these were friendly ghosts. I decided to migrate back to my pull-out bed. Another 30 minutes go by, and I've chalked it up to being nothing. And then it does it again, followed by the laughter of what sounded like children my age. I rolled over, covered my head until my parents got back. The next night I was on my pull-out bed playing possum and pretending to sleep, whilst pondering all the strange shit that had gone down. It was all around 11:30 p.m. That's when I started hearing footsteps above us. It sounded like several people were running above the room. Problem was, we were on the top floor. My parents, who think I'm asleep, started freaking out, whispering, "Holy shit," back and forth. Then a knock at our door. My dad yelps, and Mom bursts out laughing at his reaction. They go down the staircase together to answer the door like two teenagers. They still think I'm asleep. It was a hotel security dude who says, "We've received several complaints about kids playing up here. Can you please tell your kids to keep it down, as our guests are trying to sleep?" My parents respond with, "We only have one kid and she's asleep upstairs." He responds with, "Oh. I'm going to be honest, I can't say this is the first time something like this has happened." The next day my mom was in some workshops and I wanted to hit up the pool and chill with some of my friends. The same group of kids always showed up to these conferences. Our parents are all judges, senators, legislators, or lobbyists. While I was at the pool, my dad decided to play a round of golf. At one point I tried to go back to the room real quick to get something. I whipped out my room key, which was a literal key, but I couldn't get the door open. I went to the front desk and an employee walked me back to the room to try to let me in. It turned out the deadbolt, the one in the hotel rooms that can only be locked from the inside, had somehow been placed. Not exaggerating. They ended up having to take the door off the hinges so my family and I could get back into the suite. Up until this point, all these occurrences were just weird and none were particularly frightening. There were 2 days left of the trip. I fell asleep that night with no issue, but woke up to what felt like someone getting onto the pull-out bed. I thought it was my mom or dad, so I rolled over. No one was there. Alright, now I'm actually feeling trepidation. I slam my eyes shut, but have a distinct feeling that someone is watching me. I laid motionless for probably an hour, afraid to move or call out to my parents who were asleep on the other side of the wall. Then a loud bang. One of those noises that jolts you and reflexively forces your eyes open. There was a tall, probably 8 feet, no kidding, figure at the foot of my bed in a black hood. I couldn't see its face. I started screaming and hid under the covers. My parents rushed over, comforting me as I'm crying and terrified. We then all 3 heard a laugh, this time an adult, followed by loud footsteps overhead. I was done after this, and so were my parents. We packed up our stuff and left in the middle of the night. My mom missed the last day of the conference. I still see some of the friends I made on those trips, and they have their own stories from that particular conference at Jekyll Island Beach Club. One of them, a judge's son, had lucked out and gotten to stay in the lighthouse suite. Him and his father had taken us to see it, and it was incredible. Spiral staircase leading up to the top where the actual suite was. His stories of our time spent at that resort are the most terrifying. Needless to say, I will never go back. My mom recently had a conference there and refused to stay on the resort grounds, opting to stay at another hotel down the road. 2. I thought I'd share some experiences from my short time as a night watchman at a very old historic cemetery. I worked the 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. shift. The cemetery generally closed at 6 p.m., so around 5:30 p.m., I would lock the main gate, then would start driving through the cemetery to notify any visitors that we'd be closing soon. I'd instruct them to park line in front of the locked main gate, and when my drive through the grounds was complete, I would unlock the main gate. Everyone would leave, and I would lock the gate behind them. So one day, I'm in the middle of my final drive-through, and see an old lady slowly walking the sidewalk along a mausoleum. The mausoleum was hundreds of feet long, about 20 feet tall, and had no breaks in it. It was one long stretch. The road ran directly along the sidewalk of the mausoleum, so I pull up behind the lady to tell her we're closing, get out of my car, take my eyes off her for a split second as I'm getting out of the car, and when I shut the door and look up, she's gone, completely vanished. I didn't think anything paranormal at first. I just thought maybe I lost sight of her. But the sidewalk and road were completely empty. I ran all the way around and checked the back of the mausoleum, but no one was there. Across from the mausoleum was a whole field of graves, and I eagle-eyed the shit out of every row, not a soul in sight. I finish up my round and sit in my car the rest of the night in a well-lit area. I saw a fully visible person. I know it. No tricks of light. No hallucination. Plain as day. This encounter seemed to break open the proverbial dam, because after this, I had numerous unexplainable occurrences. Number 1. Normally my then girlfriend, now my wife, would drop by around 8 p.m. and bring me dinner since I couldn't really leave. I never told her about my experiences because I didn't want to freak her out. As I'm walking her back to her car to leave, I see her reach back and touch her ponytail, then look around with a look on her face. I ask her what's wrong and she says, "Nothing. I must have got my ponytail caught in a tree branch. I felt something." So I pointed out to her that the closest tree was 20 feet away and that's impossible. Then she gets really pale and says it felt like someone ran their hand through her hair front to back, and then pulled on the ponytail. We were both pretty freaked out and she left. She never came and brought me dinner again. Number 2. I was originally hired because the cemetery had a period of time where they experienced some grave robbers and people breaking in to perform satanic rituals. I was 21 years old, doing this as a side job with no gun, no weapons or anything like that. I was given a barcode scanner and was told to drive through the entire cemetery every hour or so to patrol, and to scan each of the pre-posted barcodes to prove I was actually doing it. Now this cemetery was massive, pretty much broken into 3 parts. The newer part, the historic part, and the famous part where the celebrities and other famous people are buried. I did this routine once and never did it again, going so far as to break the damn barcode scanner so I didn't have to do it. While I was driving, it was pitch black. Coming around a long curved road, my headlights picked up what I could have sworn were a pair of legs walking across the path, but only up to the knee. Shoes, pants, knees, and absolutely nothing. I stopped dead in the road and just watched this pair of legs with no body cross the road 10 feet in front of me. I put the car in reverse, did what felt like the longest K-turn of my life, and noped it straight back to the parking lot. Quick other things were lesser experiences of just hearing strange noises and seeing floating lights in the cemetery after I know for sure everyone was gone. Weird animal sounds that I couldn't recognize, etc. I'll make this the last of it, but I could write for hours. The guy who worked the day shift there, which was 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., was a grimy dude. We'll call him Bart. Part of our job was to go around the cemetery and check the graves for personal effects left by family members and remove them. Many people left things like toys for children who had passed away, birthday cards, mementos, etc. I personally hated this policy and refused to enforce it. Who was I to take a dead child's toy fire engine and throw it away? But Bart had the habit of scouring the cemetery for things he deemed valuable and would take them home, instead of throwing them away or bringing them to the office to be picked up by the family. In the short time I worked there, Bart's mental state deteriorated. He started spending hours there even after his shift was over, walking around the cemetery and drinking heavily. He seemed detached, and even more out there than when I first met him. Eventually, when I didn't see him for a week or so, I asked about him, and my boss said he just no-called, no-showed, and never heard from him again. I often wondered if he developed some type of attachment from bringing so many objects home he shouldn't have. Lastly, the experience that led to me quitting. Once Bart stopped showing up, I picked up his Saturday morning shift. It was a quiet day, so I pulled my car around the back of the old chapel to take a nap. The chapel was surrounded by 12-foot-high hedges, so I figured it was a good spot to park for an hour and shut my eyes. I fell asleep, and wake up to see my car completely surrounded by dead people. So real, so vivid, so much detail. They were all pressed up against the glass and windshield. They had on the outfits they were buried in, suits, dresses, but all dirty, and in different stages of decomposition. No one spoke, no one moved. They all just stared like I was some zoo exhibit. Then I woke up. I had been asleep and it was a dream. The thing is, it felt so real. I had never had a dream so real, so vivid, before or after. I took it as a message. I called my boss and quit as soon as I left at 4 p.m. I go back to that cemetery from time to time because I have 3 grandparents and an aunt buried there. I never linger too long though, and always make sure I'm out long before it gets dark. 3. The first time strange things started occurring to my family was back in my old home. I'm in my 20s now, and at the time I lived there I was in elementary school. Fortunately at this age I did not personally experience anything going on, however, multiple family members and friends of the family did. Occurrences include the following. Number 1. My dog laying by the fireplace actively ducking something that wasn't there. My parents describe it as someone trying to pet him and he was not having it. Number 2. A friend of the family had arrived to the house and was parked in the driveway. From there, she could see a man standing in the window of the upstairs bathroom. She waved, thinking it was my grandfather. No wave back. The only person in my home was my father, and he was in the basement. Number 3. After we had our wood floors replaced, a figure of a man could be seen through the window from the driveway, walking up and down our hallway. He repeatedly was bending down as if he was inspecting the new floors. A few years later, and we moved out of that house. My family and I have lived in this new house for around 13 years. Occurrences at this house include the following. Number 1. Shadows that represent a man standing in nearby rooms. We have a very open floor plan on the lower level of the house. Number 2. My mom, while falling asleep, would often hear someone breathing close to her. Sometimes she would feel a hand on her back, and other times she would feel someone sit down on the bed near her. Number 3. My mom was walking up the stairs one night. She kept hearing somebody behind her breathing heavily. Eventually, she grew tired of the harassment and told whatever it was to stop very sternly. The breathing ceased. Number 4. My personal experience. I was dead asleep in my bed, and I awake to my cat clawing and hissing at the corner of my room. Nothing was there, and she never acted like that, ever. I felt something was off, so I ended up making my mom sleep in the room with me. Number 5. My personal experience. The following occurred on several occasions. I would be in my room late at night with the door shut. I would hear 2 distinct knocks on my door. Every time it was always 2 knocks. The first few times I thought it was the house making noises somehow. However, the last time I heard the knocks, I was so sure it was a family member that I told them to come in. I got no answer, so I opened my door, peered out into the dark hallway, and realized everyone in my family was asleep. A short while after all of these things happened, my mom went and saw a medium with some women in the neighborhood. She was hoping to speak to her deceased mother, but apparently she did not want to talk to my mom at the time. However, the medium told my mom that somebody else was trying to communicate. Apparently the spirit of a distant uncle was inhabiting the closet of the master bedroom where my parents slept. My parents routinely argued about whether or not to keep the door open or closed. My mom always insisted it stay shut because it creeped her out. The uncle had told the medium to inform my mom that it was just him in there, and she had no reason to be afraid. The spirit also claimed that he liked the window in the closet. You guessed it. There is indeed a window in there, which is something rather uncommon. Lastly, he had looked into my mother's jewelry box, which she kept in the closet, where at the bottom she had thrown some loose change, quarters and such. The spirit said she was not saving enough money. Shortly after my mom had talked with the medium, activity in the house came to a stop. I am fortunate enough to have encountered a friendly spirit, and I like to think that after making his presence known to us, he was able to move on. 4. I gave birth to my second child in December 2011. It had been a normal pregnancy for the most part, and the birth of my child went fine until after the child was out. The midwife and team confirmed that the child was fine but seemed confused, and mumbled something about the placenta being crumbly and almost non-existent. She reached inside me looking for the remainder of it and somehow managed to tear the inside of my womb with her gloved hand. It felt like she had scratched me. It turns out I had attached placenta that had been undiagnosed before now. I proceeded to go from not bleeding at all to a fine stream of bright red blood gushing across the bed. The midwife then went into denial of the situation, and I lay there for the next 3 hours bleeding. I went in and out of consciousness. When I was out, it was like I went into a black void. I woke up several times to my own teeth violently chattering, and chastisement from the midwife that I needed to snap out of it and stop pretending. I begged and pleaded to be allowed to get into the shower to warm up. I felt like I was freezing to death from the inside. My pleas landed on deaf ears. After nearly 3 hours passed, a doctor finally showed up and did not seem convinced that anything was wrong with me, until I suddenly became very conscious and said I needed to throw up. The staff this whole time, up till now, had either been ignoring me or staring at me dispassionately. One of them handed me a very large square container and I proceeded to fill it about halfway up with bile. The staff went from acting as if I was just pretending to be ill to looking at me as if I wasn't going to make it. I signed a waiver before they rolled me into surgery. I felt very calm, but also very angry as they wheeled me out of the room. I looked at all of them and told them they better pray that I live. They all looked very frightened at that, and the memory gave me a good laugh much later after the whole ordeal was over, but definitely not then. I vaguely remember waking up in the midst of the surgery, and I apparently became quite violent. It took at least 6 people to hold me down. I woke to hearing myself talking to the 2 nurses who were monitoring me. They were asking me very personal questions. When they realized I was conscious, they immediately stopped. My first question to them was the doctor making insulting comments about me during the procedure. They looked at each other and began to try to smooth things over to me. They had to give me 5 bags of blood to save me. Thankfully, I did not have to get a hysterectomy to stop the bleeding. They said my heart nearly stopped several times and they thought they were going to lose me. As I regained full consciousness, I felt calmer than I had ever felt. And I felt different. Something has intrinsically changed. I was no longer afraid of the nurses. I was no longer afraid of anyone. There was a grayness to the surroundings in general that I had not noticed before. I listened to the people ramble on around me, either being kind or rude. It no longer seemed important either way. I held my new baby very lovingly and looked at her with new eyes. I tried to ignore the 3 transparent women in hospital garb that floated into my hospital room, who looked around my room, 2 sadly staring forward, and the 3rd turned her head towards me, and we locked eyes before they all floated back out. I also tried to ignore my brief glimpse of what appeared to be the specter of a baby lying in the crib by my hospital bed. Oddly enough, one of the nurses removed that crib and placed my baby in a different one, much to my relief. 5. My wife and I have been house shopping for several months now, so it has become a normal weekend tradition for us to meet up with our realtor and walk through houses. This past Saturday, a place popped up that was in a nice area and for a decent price, so we decided to see it the following day. We drove out to this place and met up with our realtor at about 10 a.m. on Sunday. We started our walkthrough, and as soon as we walked in, it was obvious that the place had been inhabited by elderly people. Not only were there dated wallpaper and color choices, but there was also a stair chair. Those powered chairs on a track leading to the basement. We walked through the kitchen and bedrooms and everything seemed pretty decent. We then came to a room that appeared to be an old craft room with built-in shelving and a desk. This comes into play later. Once we'd seen all of the first floor, we decided to check the basement out. It's important to know that the lights in the basement did not turn on. I think there may have been some breakers flipped because some other room lights didn't work either. The basement layout is such that once you descend the stairs, you must either go left or right. Left leads into an older finished portion of the basement, and right leads to an unfinished utility area. The realtor, my wife, and I all go to the right initially. I'm checking out the water softener system and the shelving and storage, when my wife decides to go check out the finished portion. After a second, I hear her commenting about how she could not go in that room. I chuckled to myself, assuming she was just being cheeky because it was a dark old room. The realtor decided she would go check it out, but immediately turned around and made a similar comment. I was amused because I just assumed they were playing off of each other and getting freaked out because it was a dark, creepy room. Armed with my phone flashlight turned up as bright as it would go, I decided I would check out the room since they didn't want to go in. I walked in confidently, but only made it about a couple steps before being frozen in my tracks by a paralyzing anxiety. I felt chilled to the core and I physically tensed up and recoiled at the sensations I was feeling. I felt no apprehensions about going into this room prior to stepping in. Although my wife and the realtor had felt uncomfortable going in, I honestly had no reservations. I simply wanted to see the place. But in an instant, I knew I was not welcome in this room. I had stepped into a place occupied by something or someone else, and it or they did not want me there. I looked left and right into the darkness that my phone light could not seem to penetrate. save for the small window at the far end of the room, gently glowing from the overcast day outside. I started to feel sick and decided to get out of there quickly. I stepped back out of the room to the base of the stairs, and suggested we all head up. As we walked outside to the backyard, we all felt the need to discuss what had just happened. My wife divulged that she actually felt a physical force push on her shoulders as she tried to walk in. As in, she literally felt something push her as she tried to enter, which is why she commented about not being able to go in. The realtor seemed to have had a similar experience to mine, with extreme anxiety and a feeling of not being welcome. We walked the lot and headed back up to the house to close the shades, turn off the lights, etc. As my wife walked up the stairs, our realtor noticed she had a piece of yellow lace hanging off of her sweater. Normally this wouldn't be alarming, and, admittedly, it's very likely just a result of static cling. But given the experience we just had, it seemed more sinister. We went back into the house and our realtor grabbed the piece of lace and left it in the old craft room. We didn't want to take anything from that house home with us. We all left the house, locked up, and talked about it a bit more in the driveway. Later that night as I lay down for bed, I was in that space between sleeping and waking, and I had a brief dream. I was back in that house, but at night. I stood at the top of those stairs and looked down them, when the electric stair chair started to descend by itself. I felt as though I was being baited back into the basement. I woke up pretty quickly and thankfully didn't dream about it again. I'm obviously open to the paranormal, but I'm generally a skeptic. I believe that most things have a reasonable explanation, and this may well have one too. But after reflecting on it for a couple days, I'll suspend my reasoning and just talk about what I feel. I feel like there were actually two entities in that house. An old man and an old woman. I assume the former residents. The upper floor was her space, and she made it feel welcoming and light. I think she is the reason for the yellow lace on my wife's sweater. I think the basement room was his domain, and he did not appreciate the unannounced company. Not that he meant any harm, but more of a get-out-of-my-house type of reaction. No matter the reality of what actually happened, nor the intentions of any entities there, I don't think we'll be putting in an offer. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 131. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories and sent in stories for use in this video. You know, now and again when recording these paranormal stories, I do get a bit creeped out. Especially so when I've been doing these past 2 videos. I recorded Glitch before this. And the weather's kind of weird right now. Right now my house feels quite warm. Sort of a chilly undercurrent, but it's still quite warm. I'm quite warm. So I think the fluctuations in temperature is causing just house sounds. You know, the kind of thing. But I pause every time I hear it. A thump, a creak. Wondering where it's coming from. Wondering if this is it. Wondering if it's finally coming to get me after all these years. I've escaped its notice for so long. I guess I was a fool to hope it could go on forever. All good things must come to an end. If you don't hear from me again, well, know that I appreciate everything you've done for me over the years. You kept me going through some very difficult times. You made my dark days brighter. Or I could stop screwing around and just wrap up the video. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.